Today, I'm going to be ranking every new Slay the Spire 2 card for returning classes that has been shown to us. Obviously, I have not played the game at the time of recording, so if you are watching this in the future, let me know down in the comments how correct or wrong I was in this video. I'm going to be ranking every card on a 5-star scale. 1 star means the card is bad and won't see much play. 2 star means the card is mediocre or have some very niche use cases. 3 star means the card is a decent role player and have some decent value. 4 star means the card is very good or enables some good synergy. 5 stars means the card is completely broken. Now let's get right into it with the Ironclad. Bully is a 0-cost attack that scales off vulnerable. This card sets the tone for the rest of the Ironclad cards, which have plenty of vulnerable synergies. As an early game attack, you can probably expect 6 or 8 damage out of Bully, which is fine for a 0 cost. And later in the game, you could scale more so it doesn't completely fall off. The dream would be landing Bully with something like a Terror in multiplayer and have this card deal a billion damage, but that's probably not super realistic most of the time. I'm going to give Bully a 3 star since it looks like a solid damage option that doesn't really fall off later down in the run. Pax End. A 0 energy AoE card that has a condition tied to playing it. You can only play it with 3 or more exhaust cards in your exhaust pile. Now obviously 0 energy for 17 AoE is pretty insane value, but the condition makes this card a dead draw some of the times, which isn't the best. I don't expect the condition to be super difficult to fulfill since Ironclad should have a lot of access to exhaust, as what we have seen in Slay the Spire 1. And the fact that it costs 0 means you can usually play your exhaust cards first, which probably costs energy, then play Pax End at the end of the turn on the same turn. Overall, it's a pretty efficient damage card that's not super consistent. I will give it a 3 star. Spite. A 0-cost attack that's potentially also a cantrip. First of all, 0 energy for 6 damage is already okay value for the early game, and that is without the second line of text on this card. I don't really expect Ironclad to have too much difficulty fulfilling the condition for the card draw, since Ironclad might have plenty of access to self-harm. Then this card could potentially enable some very strong infinites in the late game. Spite looks like a card that would be happy to pick up early and build my deck around some infinite or exhaust direction. Therefore, I will be giving it a 4 star. Cruelty, a 1 energy power that makes enemies take more damage when vulnerable. This is essentially a paper frog in card form. The fact that it costs only 1 energy makes it pretty easy to deploy for most fights. The effect is pretty good but not super overwhelming. It's pretty consistent damage boost since you usually want the enemies to be vulnerable before attacking them. Overall, a decent damage option but doesn't do much else, so I will be giving it a 3 stars. Aggression. This should be a power, not an attack from the wording. It puts a random attack into your hand every turn from your discard pile. This is pretty comparable to something like Machine Learning from Slay the Spire 1, which just draws you a card every turn. The fact that this upgrades the attack just means the card that Aggression puts into your hand is usually at least somewhat okay. Now, there are different pros and cons for putting an attack into your hand instead of just drawing a card. The downside is this doesn't dig deeper into your deck to accelerate you further into your other scaling options, and it's not super flexible since there are going to be turns where you don't want to attack at all. Now, the upside is you will always be able to spend your energy on damage, which could be more relevant in the early game. It could also enable you to build a more greedy deck, so to speak, and let you skip more attacks since Aggression is always going to put 1 attack into your hand every turn. Overall, I think this is a pretty decent card that gives you some sort of card advantage, and I will be giving it a 3 star. Personally, I'm pretty excited to see if there are different ways to potentially break this card. For example, the return of Searing Blow, and you can just upgrade your Searing Blow over and over. Blood Wall, a 2 energy block card also deals damage to you. 2 energy for 15 block is an okay rate at best, and losing 2 HP is not a great effect until you have some sort of self-harm synergy. Overall, this just looks like an early game pick if you really need a block. Otherwise, there has to be some better things if you want to enable the self-harm package. Therefore, I will be giving it a 2 star. Breakthrough, a 1 energy AoE card that deals 10 damage. 1 energy for 10 AoE is a pretty decent rate, and compared to Blood Wall, you only lose 1 HP instead of 2. I think this card is probably a bit better than Blood Wall. I think Breakthrough is a decent early game attack which could have some utility late game. I will give it a 3 star. Cinder, a 2 energy attack with a pretty weird effect, and we all know weird means bad. 2 energy for 15 damage is really below par, and exhausting the top 2 cards of your draw pile looks like a pretty bad effect, since it can hit key cards in your deck. This doesn't look like something I would be interested in the early game, since the damage portion of the card just really isn't efficient. And late game, there are probably way better ways to exhaust down your deck compared to the top 2 cards in your draw pile. I will give Cinder a 1 star since it doesn't look super viable. Colossus, a 1 energy block card that also has 50% damage reduction. Obviously, 1 energy for 3 block is terrible value, so this card's value hinges on the second line of text. Receiving 50% less damage could be a massive effect if the enemy is hitting you for like 50. So in a way, this could be like a 1 cost impervious in the late game. This card also doesn't exhaust, so you could potentially have this effect up every single turn. I think the problem with this card is, from the way it's worded, the enemy will still attack you for the full amount, and you're only reducing the unblocked portion of their attack, which in a sense makes other block cards you play on the same turn as Colossus way worse. Overall, I think Colossus has a very powerful effect that's also very situational, therefore I would give it a 3 star. Grapple, a 1 energy skill that makes the enemy vulnerable and lose strength. From what we know in Slay the Spire 1, a strength down effect is potentially very powerful against multi-hit enemies. So as a baseline 2 vulnerable and -2 strength for the turn, Grapple is already going for a pretty decent rate. And of course, the more vulnerable you stack on, the better this card gets, and it doesn't even exhaust. Overall, it's a pretty good baseline and potentially a very strong payoff for the vulnerable package. Grapple gets a solid 4 star from me. Hellraiser, a 3 cost power with a pretty janky effect. Whenever you draw a strike, it gets played against a random enemy for free. This card reminds me of Fire Breathing from Slay the Spire 1, which dealt damage whenever you drew a status card. And Fire Breathing was a pretty terrible card most of the times. The fact that Hellraiser costs 3 just makes it even worse. You aren't usually excited about adding more strikes to your deck, so this card will be hitting basic strike most of the time. On top of that, the strikes are played against a random enemy, which could have mechanics that punishes you for playing cards or attacking, such as Spiker or Time Eater from Slay the Spire 1. Overall, Hellraiser is probably a pretty terrible card, not worth playing most of the time, so I would give it a 1 star. I can potentially see this card popping off with something like a calculated gamble-like effect, but I don't really expect Ironclad to have access to that kind of card draw. Howl from Beyond, a 3 energy AoE card with an ability to cheat the cost. 3 energy for 16 AoE damage is terrible and pretty much never worth playing unless you're desperate. So this card is all about its unique ability to be played from exhaust. Unlike some other exhaust payoffs that just require you to exhaust down your deck, Howl from Beyond needs you to draw it with an exhaust card on the same turn. Then you have to wait until the next turn for it to do anything. Furthermore, after it is played, I'm assuming it will go to your discard pile, and you will have to exhaust it again next deck cycle. That is a lot of work for a payoff that's only 16 AoE damage. If you can consistently make Howl from Beyond go off every turn, surely there's something way better you could be doing with your deck. I think Howl from Beyond could fill a niche role in decks where there's a lot of draw and literally no damage options. Otherwise, it does not seem super viable. I will be giving it a 2 star. Mango, a 3 energy big stat stick. 3 energy for 15 damage is a very poor rate, but the 10 strength down could shut down some enemies for the entire turn, effectively turning this card into a vault that also deals 15 damage. However, this card falls short when there are multiple enemies, or if the enemy is hitting you for a single big hit, or if the enemy is buffing, so it's not super consistent. I can see Mango being a pretty good early game card with some utility against multi-hit enemies in the late game, which gives it decent value throughout the run. I think this earns Mango a solid 3 star. Stone Armor, a 1 cost power that gives you 5 plating at the cost of 1 dexterity. 5 free block every turn is quite good, especially in the early game, and the dexterity downside doesn't matter too much if you aren't playing many defense every turn. This makes Stone Armor a pretty good defensive option for the early and mid game, until you find a block solution that scales into the end game, making it a solid 3 star. Taunt, a 1 cost block card that also applies vulnerable. Blocking for 7 for 1 energy is a bit below par, but applying 1 vulnerable to your enemies makes up for it to justify this card's value. Most of the time, you'll be playing Taunt to save some chip damage early game, then follow up with another attack on the same turn. Later in the round, the vulnerable isn't completely worthless, as it could be artifact strip or just extending the status in a longer fight. Taunt looks like a decent early game pickup with some utility later, earning it a 3 star. Tremble, very simple and efficient zero-cost vulnerable source. I would give it a solid 3-star. Unrelenting, a 2-cost attack that also cheats energy for the next attack. Now the dream for this card is to cheat out a massive attack like Bludgeon to get maximum value from the ability. However, in practice, the effect might be way worse than what you think. You will either need to draw the payoff in the same hand or draw it next turn. And the base card of 2 energy for 12 damage is just not very appealing. I can see some niche situations where you can make Unrelenting work, but my overall impression of this card isn't great. I will give it a 2-star. That's it for Ironclad cards. Now let's move on to the Silent. Anticipate, a 0-cost skill that gives you dexterity for the turn. Now 0 energy for 3 block is a pretty terrible rate, so you would generally want to play this with 2 other block cards on the same turn, which on the Silent generally shouldn't be too challenging. And if there's any artifact or cleanse effects like orange pellets, you can potentially keep the 3 dexterity for good. Anticipate looks like a solid early game block option that could have some late game potential, earning it a 3-star. Hidden Daggers, a 0-cost Shiv generator that also discards 2 cards. Now we don't know what the unupgraded version does, but I'm assuming it's going to be add 2 Shivs into your hand. Since if it's a 1-cost, add 3 Shivs, they're just Blade Dance, but also discards. Under that assumption, 0 energy for 8 damage isn't terrible, and the discard effect could potentially bridge you into the discard package later on, making Hidden Daggers a pretty decent 3-star in my opinion. Reflex, the same card from Slay the Spire 1 but with the slide keyword. Slide just means whenever you discard this card, it is played for free. You will probably never play Reflex for 3 energy, but it was one of the core enablers for the discard package in Slay the Spire 1. I expect Reflex to be quite good in Slay the Spire 2 as well, if you are able to build your deck around it, making it a 4-star. A good old Blade Dance, but now it exhausts. Now 1 energy for 12 damage is still quite good early game, and there are potentially still some powerful shift synergy you can find later down the line. Blade Dance exhausting just means it gets out of your deck if you pivot away from shifts, and you will want to find some other ways of generating shifts if you want to go down the shift package. Overall, still a pretty solid damage common. I would give it a solid 3 stars. Flick Flack, one of the other new slide cards. Doing 7 AoE for 0 is decent, and the fact that you can play this card for 1 energy gives it some flexibility. This card could be an okay early game option to get some payoff for the discard package, but it doesn't really do much later, since 7 damage AoE is just a bit too small. Overall, it's a pretty mediocre card that could be picked early and doesn't scale particularly well. I'll be giving it a 2-star. Master Planner, a shiny new 3-cost power that makes everything slide. Now the potential for this card is pretty insane. I could imagine a world where you make your entire deck slide and it just loops itself infinitely. In practice, however, this is most likely just going to be an energy cheating card that makes some of your important skills free in longer fights, which could still be quite solid. I am cautiously optimistic on Master Planner, and maybe there's going to be some ways to completely break this card. So on that regard, I will be giving it a 4-star. Fan of Knives, or Electro-Shivnamics is how I would describe it. Doing 12 AoE damage for 2 energy is obviously not great, but any shift synergy could make the shifts hit for harder. And the ongoing effect is not too terrible either. Looks like an okay card that can deal with AoE fights, but the value of this card really depends on the game environment for the importance of AoE. For now, I would give it a 3-star since it looks like a card that can solve some specific problems in the Spire. And that is all for the new cards for the returning classes ranked. Let me know in the comments about what your predictions are for some of these new cards. I will see you in the next video for more Slay the Spire 2 content. Bye!